Memorial Museum and Library in New Delhi. We've gathered today for the launch of Rajdeep Sardesai's book. It's called 2014, The Elections That Changed India. It's a fascinating book full of revealing insights, but even more importantly, it has some delicious, some would say indiscreet stories that are absolutely ripping to read. With me is the author himself, Rajdeep Sardesai, but I also have two very special guests, Finance Minister Arun Jaitley and his immediate predecessor, Mr. Chidambaram. We're going to spend the next 1 hour talking about the insights and the details in Rajdeep's book, but also about those delicious indiscreet revelations. But because I have the Finance Minister and his immediate predecessor, we're also going to spend a little time talking about the state of the Indian economy. And let me assure you, on that subject, the two gentlemen are not likely to agree. So sit back and enjoy yourselves, because for the next 1 hour, I hope the discussion that follows will be not just fascinating and revealing and interesting, but even at times contentious and disputatious. Gentlemen, let's start with the 2014 elections, which is what Rajdeep's book is about. Arun Jaitley, he ranks 2014 in the same league as 1952, the first election, but also 1977, the first time a government was defeated. And Rajdeep writes, 2014 moved the center of gravity of an Indian election from identity politics to aspirational politics. How much do you agree with him?
Well, substantially correct, for the reason that post-1984, we've seen a different kind of elections in India. And post-91, in most elections, every state gave you a different kind of a result. And we'd almost started suggesting that an Indian election is a net aggregate of polls being held in various states. You could have Kerala and Tamil Nadu vote in opposite directions. You could have Maharashtra and Gujarat voting in opposite directions. So it depended on how each state voted. And we thought that the age of tall leaders, tall majorities is all over. And we are almost in perpetuity going to be in coalition politics. Now, this was also the anticipation in run-up to 2014. Till towards the end of the campaign, people realized this was not happening. Because you could see almost a uniform trend in most parts of India. Of course, where there was hardly an organization of the BJP to support winning, we increased our vote substantially in those states. But states where we had a reasonable presence, we almost swept through all those states. And the factor that prevailed was almost common. And if you see an additional two factors, since 1991, every election has been affected by social factors or caste factors. This factor was not. So parties which have relied essentially on a caste following to win a substantial number of seats, all did reasonably badly. Those who relied on the charisma of individual leaders or families or dynasties, as we call them, and here my reference is not merely to the Congress party, even within the states, most of those parties who thought that here is this very charismatic family in this state which can hold the state together, and those families had done reasonably well, across the country, they did badly. Therefore, those traditional trends did not work in this election. You almost had a single factor running across the country. It was a little less noticeable in states where the BJP organization was relatively weaker. We could increase our vote by 10%, 15% in those states. But we couldn't win too many seats in that state, but we yet left an impact. In that sense, it was an entirely different election.
Okay. I encourage you to give me slightly shorter answers so that we can make it a little bit more conversational. Mr. Chidambaram, quoting Ram Guha, Rajdeep also says that 2014 could have destroyed the Nehruvian consensus that had dominated Indian politics for decades. Given the speed with which the Prime Minister has abolished the Planning Commission, given the way he identifies mythological India with scientific achievements and hardly talks about Jawaharlal Nehru, is that consensus dispensed with? Is it discarded?
Well, try as hard as they might, I doubt if they can completely destroy or demolish the consensus that evolved after Nehru. But I agree that these have to be redefined from time to time. Even the BJP, to govern India for the next 5 years, has to build a new consensus. It surely can't govern on a divisive agenda. It can't govern on a purely right-wing agenda. It can't govern on a Hindutva agenda. You have to evolve a new consensus. And I think much of that consensus has to borrow from Jawaharlal Nehru. You cannot and you should not destroy the consensus evolved in the Nehruvian era.
Arun Jaitley, you're sitting in an auditorium named after Jawaharlal Nehru. How much of his legacy can you put behind you and say is part of the historical past, no longer relevant today? Do you need to accept that this man is not just the father of Indian democracy, but it's because of him that the opposition is a cherished entity in India today? It applied to you when you were in opposition, it applies to them today.
See, merely because we are sitting in an auditorium named after Panditji, it's certainly not a ground that what the agenda of the new government is going to be. Essentially, some of those issues may be relevant. Democracy is relevant. Opposition is relevant. Trying to carry the people of India with you is extremely relevant. But at the same time, some of those economic policies may not be relevant. Approach to certain issues may not be relevant. Some of the security issues which exist today didn't exist at that time. And therefore, you will have to evolve a new kind of a policy emphasis in all those areas, which may be quite alien to the era in which Panditji evolved his viewpoints.
Okay. Let's come to the reasons that Rajdeep identifies why, in fact, this election went the way it did. Mr. Chidambaram, Rajdeep quotes you to say, and I'm going to repeat what he said to him, the economy destroyed us in 2014. If we'd got the economy on the right track, nothing else would have mattered. It wasn't corruption or scams, it was the economy which has destroyed us. Was it mismanagement of the economy that destroyed you, or just bad luck?
Some mistakes, but mostly global events. The consensus then was, well, I have moved to the Home Ministry, therefore I can't really say that we could have pursued alternative policies. I was a member of the cabinet, therefore I take responsibility along with others. The consensus then was, worldwide, that the answer to the Great Recession of 2008 was Keynesian economics, that you had to spend money. Therefore, all the work that was done for 5 years, bringing the fiscal deficit down to 2.5, controlling the revenue deficit to 1.1, and moderating inflation, all that work was reversed in 3 years of 3 stimuli packages. Now, whether that's right or wrong, it's for economists and economic historians to say. So by 2010-11, we had breached all the limits of fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, and inflation. We tried our best to reverse it. We succeeded partially, but then the hint by one man in distant Washington again created another setback. If we had got the economy right by 2013, early 2014, I think the results would have been very different, although I will concede that still the BJP may have been the #1 party.
Rajdeep, people have often questioned what were the serious mismanagement decisions of the economy taken by UPA. And many people come around to saying that perhaps the symbol of the worst decision, and it's something that Mr. Jaitley referred to as well when he was talking to the World Economic Forum, was retrospective taxation. Mr. Jaitley said if there was a bad idea, that was definitely it. As someone who's researched that period, who's responsible? Pranab Mukherjee, who was finance minister, or Dr. Manmohan Singh, without whose clearance, presumably, this could never have happened?
Now, I was interested in seeing Mr. Chidambaram very cleverly say that he had moved already to the Home Ministry. You see, Mr. Chidambaram made it very clear that the downfall in the economy is not his responsibility.
I didn't say that. I said I take collective responsibility.
You take collective responsibility, but you did briefly mention that you moved to the Home Ministry. I think what did happen is that I think a series of events which date back to 2008, just before the 2009 elections, going up to 2012, the global financial crisis starts in 2008, and then the 2012 budget, which brings in the retrospective tax, is perhaps the final signal, in a sense, that things have gone awfully wrong. And maybe Mr. Chidambaram should tell us, because there was one view which I didn't mention in the book, but that Dr. Mukherjee had taken this decision without informing even the Prime Minister. That the Prime Minister came to know of the retrospective tax decision only when he saw the budget at the last moment. Now, I don't know what that says about the cabinet system by 2012, because one of my theses in the book is that this election was lost by the UPN 2011. That's the year you went into ICU. First you had Anna, then you had Ramdev, then you had Raja just before that, you had Suresh Kalmadi, corruption, the economy falling. You were a government in ICU from 2011, and even the Prime Minister had lost control.
Before you
I
answer,
thought we were talking about the economy, and when
I interrupt you for a second?
when it turned.
Yes.
I think the stimulus packages of 2008, end of 2008, 2009, and 2010, when we breached all limits, that's when we lost control over the economy. What happened thereafter, you're right.
But whose decision was the retrospective tax?
Whose decision was retrospective tax? And secondly, did the Prime Minister know before it was announced? Did he find out as he was sitting in Parliament hearing it be said?
Well, firstly, it was a budget proposal. It was not outside the budget. The retrospective tax was a budget proposal. And as Finance Minister knows, and I don't know, Chiki was right. All that she forgot was, she said, Honorable Finance Minister, Chidambaram. She omitted the comma. She was right. Finance Minister knows. Budget proposals are only between the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister.
So does that mean Dr. Manmohan Singh knew?
You should ask Dr. Manmohan Singh. Budget proposals are only between the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister. I think the matter was discussed at some level, and the decision was taken. What I know and how much I know, I'll reveal when I write my book.
I think, Mr. Chidambaram, you found a very clever way of avoiding answering whether Dr. Manmohan Singh knew or not.
Well, I said budget proposals are between the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister.
All right. Gentlemen, since I have the Finance Minister of the day and the Finance Minister of the immediate past, let's come to the economy. Arun Jaitley, you've said in Parliament not once but repeatedly that the economy you inherited was in a shambles. You said, in fact, on the 10th of June, things that have been done have to be undone. No one could disagree with you more vociferously than Mr. Chidambaram. Explain to us today why you believe he left you a shambles.
You see, I think I normally measure my words, so you are overstating while you quote me.
Shambles is a quotation, PTI 10th June.
You see, the economy I have always maintained that we inherited was in a very challenging situation. It was in a challenging situation for more than one reason. We've always believed, and in some of the years of the UPA, they had managed to achieve that rate, that the real potential of the Indian economy was much higher. There may be global factors, but we went down to sub 5% for 2 consecutive years, and these were very difficult years. And when you go sub 5%, the jobs get affected, the revenues get affected, your ability to expand economic activity gets affected and influenced. And therefore, you have to take off from that. India had more or less fallen off the global radar, and this is what most international investors say. Now, when you initially said that it was not corruption, but it was the economy, don't forget there was a link between the two. The retrospective tax may have been a defining moment. And let me just say, no finance minister ever comes up and presents a budget in Parliament till it has been extensively discussed with the Prime Minister. The Cabinet comes to know of it only the broad proposals a few minutes before it is presented. So you can't really say that the Cabinet is aware of it, but proposals are discussed with the Prime Minister at length.
So you're confirming Manmohan Singh must have known?
So every finance minister has to discuss his proposal more than once with the Prime Minister. He can't introduce proposals making radical reforms or taking steps till he has the full backing of the Prime Minister on those proposals. Now, besides this, there were areas of corruption which added to the international disillusionment against us. Whether 2G was rightly allotted the spectrum or wrongly allotted, but the net consequence is people come to this country, invest in this country. Because of serious questions raised, the entire allocation is cancelled. Licenses are cancelled by the Supreme Court. The investment made by those investors is confiscated. Now, if that's the image that you get, power sector suffers because of coal. You had an opportunity when issues were raised with regard to the coal allocation to say, well, we scrap the whole thing and we'll now follow a more transparent process. There was no reason why you should have persisted with that discretionary allotment when day after day it was being published that friends of the ruling party were really amongst the beneficiaries of this. I'm just giving two examples. Now, these may be areas of corruption, but they seriously impacted on any finance minister's ability to build domestic and international confidence with regard to the economy. And that's when not only international investors, but even domestic investors get disillusioned.
Before I go to Mr. Chidambaram, clarify one thing for me. You've become a diplomat. When I said you used the word shambles, you converted it to challenging. But when you did use the word shambles, did you mean Mr. Chidambaram's handling? Did you mean the Supreme Court's handling? Did you mean Dr. Manmohan Singh's handling? Who's responsible for the shambles?
Well, I think I've already clarified that the phrase that I have consistently used was it's a challenging situation. It's a difficult situation. Now, you picked up the word shambles, and now you want to put it in my mouth as you do on television every day. That I must say the Supreme Court has put us in the shambles or somebody else has put us. Well, that's a phrase you can conveniently forget because I'm not owning it up.
All right. Except that PTI 10th June attributed to you in quotation marks. Mr. Chidambaram, Mr. Jaitley says that the steps that he's taken since May have reined in inflation, boosted growth, lifted sentiment, opened up the economy to FDI, and now steadily they're going to bring back black money. Did he do all of this? Or is he claiming credit for things you set in motion, which just fortuitously have begun to yield results while he's in office?
Well, I think my friend is speaking in the future tense. These things are likely to happen. They haven't happened yet. But the economy was challenging even in 2004. The economy was challenging when
Not shambles.
No, I don't think they were in shambles. I didn't say that.
We left behind an 8.4% growth rate.
No. You left behind an average growth rate of 5.7%.
See, but
you left behind.
Peaked,
yeah.
You inherited an economy which had peaked at 8.4. We inherited an economy which had taken a downturn at 4.7.
We've had this debate in Parliament several times, and I don't mind debating it again. You left an economy with an average growth rate of 5.7%. You left an economy which in the last year had touched a growth rate of about 8.1 or 8.2% on the back of a disastrous year that forced you to shift your finance minister then. But I don't think we need to go back to pre-2004. In my first economic survey, I conceded that it is challenging, but in 2004, the economy was still a resilient economy. And in fact, you seized on it and said, you yourself conceded it's a resilient economy. I said so, because I believe that. It was challenging in 2012 when I returned to the finance ministry, and I admit it was challenging in 2014 when Mr. Jaitley took over. But these challenges are substantially challenges because of the challenged global economy. Why I said, and that perhaps he's speaking in the future tenses, the global economy is challenged even today. European growth rates are likely to be only 1.3%. China has a falling growth rate. Many countries of Europe are in recession. US's unemployment is 6%. Therefore, the economy is challenged even today. Therefore, I sincerely hope that they will do as well as they promised to do. In fact, if they achieve the record of an average of 8.5% that we showed in UPA 1, as the accidental holder of that record, I'll be very happy. And as an Indian, I'll be very proud if they can match 8.5%.
Except, Mr. Chidambaram, you've become a diplomat like Mr. Jaitley. I asked you whether he's right in claiming credit for reining in inflation, boosting growth, lifting investor sentiments, opening up the economy to FDI, or did you do all of this?
Well, I'll answer it. I think he's speaking in the future tense, and much of the heavy lifting was done in the last 12 months of the UPA government. And he has still a very heavy load to lift, and I wish him good luck.
Mr. Jaitley, the truth is that the Modi government shows a very different response to its political challenges compared to its economic ones. When you had to fight elections in Maharashtra and Haryana, the safest and the cleverest thing would have been to fight it with allies. You'd have won for sure, but you didn't. You fought on your own, you doubled the risk, and you succeeded. But when it comes to economic reforms, the phrase you use is that reform is the art of the possible. But in politics, the sky was the limit. And as a result, on labor law reform, you're only going to make it easier to move PF or to reduce vexatious what you may call the vexatious inspections, but you're not actually approaching hire and fire. You're not removing retrospective taxation, you're only promising not to do it. When it comes to land acquisition, you're going to increase the exemptions, but you're not going to make it cheaper or easier. And people turn around and say, why is Mr. Modi not bold on economic reform? That's why people feel let down.
Well, nobody's feeling let down. I don't know, only Karan Thapar may be feeling let down. That's not the response we are getting from the country. If you see the election results, people are not feeling let down. Now, let me tell you, it's very easy to make a comment that do the most difficult reform first. Now, there are a large number of reforms which people have broadly referred to as the second-generation reforms which have to take place in this country. Some are very easily implementable. Some require a larger consensus. Some are extremely difficult to implement within the real polity of this country. Therefore, to be able to implement those reforms, you have to survive and then implement. You don't have to lose every election, go out of power, and they say, I was not able to do it. Therefore, in the very first year, second year of a government, we have our agenda full, and therefore, reforms which are difficult, reforms which can create a confrontational situation within the society, and where you will find yourself completely isolated, don't have to be the first on your agenda. They can come at any later stage where a country develops a larger appetite for reform.
Except the political
Can I respond
capital.
to that?
Absolutely. Go ahead. Go right ahead.
Well, I feel let down, and I'll tell you why. We have not had a government with an absolute single-party majority in about 30 years. In the 8 years that I was finance minister and present at 8 budgets, I didn't have a majority in the Lok Sabha. You have one today, 282 members belonging to a single party, 335 or so in the coalition and many other supporters. This was the time to take the hard decision. For example, with 282, I would have reversed the retrospective tax. It required a simple amendment to the Income Tax Act saying, you pay the tax amount, but I'll waive the penalty and the interest, and I'm sure Vodafone would have jumped at that opportunity. With 282, you cannot reverse what turned out to be a very bad taxation proposals. See, the people of India did not vote against us because of retrospective taxation. retrospective taxation is directly connected with investor sentiment. That could have been reversed. And I was fondly hoping, I was expecting that Arun would reverse it. With 282, you should have done that.
Did you lose your courage?
Well, let me tell you, in the run-up to the election, when it was becoming clear in the last 1 or 2 years that we'd probably could form the next government, I had always thought that Mr. Chidambaram would clean up the mess that his government had earlier created.
So we've gone from shambles to mess.
And retrospective tax was a mess entirely created by you. It was a defining moment as far as the Indian economy is concerned. We kept hearing that the UPA has some proposals on retrospective tax. You didn't act accordingly. On the contrary, other steps which were taken in the matter of taxation all gave Indian economy a bad name. And some of those proposals, when actually implemented, won't end us bringing additional tax because they are hardly likely to succeed. But they send a fear psychosis amongst the investors internationally. When we took over the government and inherited the retrospective tax mess which they had created, what did we do on taxation? We took a policy decision that as far as this government is concerned, unlike the UPA, even though there is a sovereign power of retrospective taxation, we are not going to exercise that power. So there will be no retrospective taxation of the kind which the UPA had imposed.
Except that what happens if people don't believe your word?
People currently are believing our word. We come back to that, Karan. You don't speak for the people today. We are the representatives of the people, not you. As far as the second is concerned, under the existing law, no new notices would be issued. And cases which are pending before a tribunal or a court, which includes the cases, including the Vodafone case, we'll await for a judgment of that tribunal or court and finally accept that judgment. So we diluted the damage done by the UPA on the issue of retrospective by giving an assurance to the investors globally, which I do believe most investors have accepted, except those stray cases, which is pending in a court, where or a tribunal, we'll await for the tribunal judgment. What we did not do, by legislation, decide a pending dispute against the government of India. We thought perhaps there may be difficulty, notwithstanding our 282 seats, for Indian public opinion, there may be a lot of difficulty in understanding this, that a dispute is pending in a court, and by legislation you decide that dispute against the government of India, maybe going a bit too far. Short of that, we gave a complete assurance on the retrospective taxation and to put the issue behind us.
Mr. Chidambaram,
that assurance had been given by me in August, September, October 2012. If you have repeated that assurance, I welcome it. But that was not the first time an assurance was given to investors. That assurance had been given by me clearly. Media has reported it. There are speeches, there are statements. We had told the investor community we will no longer have any retrospective
Isn't it wonderful, ladies and gentlemen, to see our two politicians quarreling and disagreeing and doing it so amicably as well?
Now, just a moment.
You want to carry on?
Vodafone is not a pending dispute. Vodafone was a settled dispute. There was no pending dispute there. I could not reverse it because we did not have a majority. And in a year, in the run-up to the election, people would have pointed a finger and said, this is a scam. You have given up interest, you have given up penalty, you have done a deal with Vodafone. I said so to Vodafone. I said so to the Vodafone chief. I said, I can't do it. So let's do it through a conciliation. With 282, you could have done it. I still wish you will do it in February 2015.
I'm going to ask each of you one more question on the economy in a wider perspective and then come back to Rajdeep's book, because I don't want to lose focus, because the book has some fascinating things to say about Narendra Modi and Rahul Gandhi, and those deserve to be not just known but discussed. But I want to quickly point out something to you, Mr. Jaitley, that industrialists and investors abroad say. This belief that Don't do the most difficult reforms first. Tackle those that are possible.